90% of cheetah cubs in the wild die in the first 3 months. One South African family is doing everything it can to try and save the vulnerable species from extinction, one cheetah at a time. The Buchanan family has rescued 2 captive cheetahs from the UK and reintroduced them into the Karoo. It's a beautiful part of the country. Joining us now to tell us about the world first is the owner of Mount Camdeboo. It's Iain Buchanan. Hello to you, Iain. Very well known in conservation circles, not just because of the beautiful area that you live in, but also your conservation efforts. There's a lot I want to talk about. I don't have all the time in the world, I'm afraid, but I'd love to. But I do have to ask, rescuing 2 captive cheetahs, tell me about that story. How did that happen?
Sure. Well, I think just to sort of take a little step back, it's not just us. We are just one family of quite a few families that are all committed to conservation. And this has largely actually been driven by the Aspinall Foundation with Damien and Victoria and Amos in the UK, who own a zoo called the Harlots and Portland. And I think they just really had a passion to try and see how zoos could play a more important conservation role by returning certain species that were endangered back into the wild.
So we're not talking necessarily about 2 captive cheetahs that you had to rescue per se. This was planned from the beginning, is that correct?
This was very much planned from the beginning. When Damien and Victoria and Amos came out to South Africa in November 2019, and we were fortunate enough to take them around the property, and they were looking at quite a few properties to rewild their cheetah. And we sort of showed them our property and our infrastructure and our team. And needless to say, 2 days later, they sort of made the commitment. So it's the first time from what we've done in terms of research that captive bred cheetah in the UK have returned to the African continent and have been rewilded successfully. And that was the big momentous occasion this last week when we saw Sabre and Naira sort of put their first sort of paws onto the wilderness section of the property.
It must have been a wonderful moment. I'm sure there's videos on social media that I want to go and take a look at as well. Iain, I think many people might not realize just how close to extinction cheetah are. I think a lot of us are focused very much on the elephants, the rhino, the pangolin, because they're being hunted. What is the story with cheetah?
So currently we're looking at about just over 7,100 cheetah in a wilderness sort of region or in the wild. That said, there are a lot of cheetah, almost as much as sort of 3,000 that are currently in captivity, either in zoos or as pets, which really is saddening. And sadly, those genetics are just not playing any sort of form of important role in the greater sort of wild sort of populations. So EWT, Endangered Wildlife Trust, led by a legend called Vincent, came up with this whole concept of let's try and look after a certain population, which currently sits at around 460, with the intention of bringing in as many new genetics into that population and trying to make it as robust, and as strong as possible. Because that's the real challenge. Cheetah have been through this bottleneck before in the last century. And we don't want them to go back into that bottleneck because it just causes all sorts of issues with bone deformation, susceptible to various viruses, etc. So yeah, genetic diversity is one of the main key sort of focuses of this rewilding project, as well as just proving the concept that we can actually rewild captive bred, cheetah.
It's amazing news to hear that you are able to do this, especially if they've been in captivity as well. Iain, a final question to you briefly, if you could. How are they doing once they took their first steps on African soil? How's their progress been?
It's been incredible. Actually, to monitor the first sort of 72 hours has just been, I mean, there's been lots of highs and lows, lots of sort of nervous points. But our team on the ground has documented pretty much every event. The first one, obviously, them crossing that threshold of this fence, and in a little video that's doing the rounds, it's just really emphasizing. It's not just that sort of fence; it's this sort of barrier for this species to really sort of find a new way to protect themselves. We really have just almost facilitated them doing all the hard work, and we're just trying to put all the mechanisms around them to protect them in that journey. The next one was when when Sabre actually came across, when Naira came across Ava, which is the female cheetah with her 2 cubs. And there was a real concern around, how he would react seeing this female cheetah almost for the first time, and also interact with these cubs. And amazingly, she stood her ground, but she was still sort of curious, and he was curious in her and also the cubs. But she didn't let him get close enough to the cubs to cause any harm. So there are a little bit of risky moments in this journey, but it's going phenomenally well. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of more exciting adventures ahead. Obviously, the next is when they do breed, and then the important part of that being the next generation going into the meta population.
Actually, I do have one more question just before I say goodbye to you, Ian. Any more cheetah that we can expect at your reserve? Are you speaking to other organizations to try and get captive cheetah to where you are? It seems the program is working.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, the Ashia conservation or cheetah conservation program that's based in Paarl, they've also played a critical role in facilitating at the sort of second phase of the rewilding of cheetah. When Sabre and Naira arrived in Cape Town, they went and stayed there for 3 months. And then they came up to the game reserve. So there's actually so many different organizations currently doing this type of work. But I'd like to think that between the Aspinalls, Ashia, and ourselves, we sort of really are pioneering new ground and really sort of having those successes, which is great.
And congratulations, Ian, to you and the other families, and also to those 2 little ones back on African soil as well. It's a beautiful part of the country, Mount Camdeboo. If you've not been there, I think if it wasn't worth a visit before, it really is now, with Iain Buchanan and the team bringing these cheetah back. Congratulations to them as well. Private game reserve, Mount Camdeboo, beautiful part of the country in the Karoo. Perfect, really plain area for cheetahs to run and be cheetahs. All right.